Old white man mocked a black girl's accent. Her reply had the whole cafe clapping. The morning rain had just stopped when Maya Okonkwo pushed open the heavy glass door of the Grindstone Café. The bell above the door made a soft, chiming sound that mixed with the hiss of the espresso machine. She was 22 years old, in her final semester at the university, and her stomach was doing nervous flips. In exactly 3 hours, she would be sitting in front of a panel of executives at Morrison Architecture Group, one of the biggest firms in the city. This interview could change everything for her family. Her mother had worked double shifts at the hospital for 15 years to pay for Maya's education. Her younger brother Samuel was still in high school, dreaming of following his sister to college. Maya carried all their hopes in her leather portfolio bag, along with her carefully prepared presentation about sustainable building designs. She had come to this cafe, her favorite spot near campus, to practice one more time. The familiar smell of roasted coffee beans usually calmed her nerves. She had discovered this place during her freshman year when she was too homesick to eat and too proud to call her mother crying. The elderly woman who owned it back then, Mrs. Chen, had noticed Maya sitting alone with her textbooks and brought her a free blueberry muffin. "You remind me of myself 40 years ago," Mrs. Chen had said with a kind smile. "New country, big dreams, scared but determined." That small act of kindness had made the Grindstone feel like a second home. Maya found her usual corner table near the window where the morning light made everything look golden and hopeful. She placed her order with Marcus, the barista she had gotten to know over the years. He was working his way through culinary school and always drew little designs in the foam of her lattes. "Big day today?" Marcus asked, noticing her professional outfit. She was wearing her best blazer, the navy blue one she had found at a consignment shop and had tailored to fit perfectly. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun that had taken 45 minutes to get right. "The Morrison interview," she said, her West African accent more pronounced when she was nervous. Her family had moved from Nigeria when she was 7, and while she could switch between accents when needed, her natural voice carried the musical rhythm of her birthplace. "You're going to be amazing," Marcus said with genuine warmth. "I'll make your cappuccino extra special for good luck." As he worked the machine, Maya pulled out her notes. She had written her presentation on color-coded index cards. The blue ones contained technical specifications about environmentally friendly materials. The green ones held cost analysis data she had spent 3 months researching. The yellow ones had her personal story about why architecture mattered to her, how she wanted to build spaces that brought communities together, structures that honored both innovation and tradition. She began practicing under her breath, keeping her voice low to not disturb the other customers. "Good morning, my name is Maya Okonkwo, and I'm excited to share my vision for sustainable urban development." She repeated the line 3 times, working on making each word clear and confident. Around her, the cafe was filling with its usual morning crowd. There were students hunched over laptops, their faces lit by screens. A young mother was trying to keep her toddler entertained while stealing sips of her coffee. 2 men in construction gear were discussing a building project, their hands moving as they described measurements. The morning rush created a comfortable buzz of activity. Maya felt less alone in her nervousness. Everyone here was starting their day, chasing their own dreams and deadlines. She took a deep breath and continued practicing. The Morrison Group has always been at the forefront of architectural innovation, and I believe my background in both traditional Nigerian design principles and modern sustainability practices would bring a unique perspective to your team. The words felt strange in her mouth, too formal, like wearing shoes that technically fit but weren't broken in yet. She had rehearsed this speech so many times in her dorm room that her roommate Kelly could probably recite it from memory. That's when she noticed him. An older white man, probably in his 70s, sitting at the table next to hers. He had silver hair combed back with too much gel and wore an expensive-looking gray suit that seemed out of place in a college cafe. His face had the kind of deep lines that came from years of frowning. He was reading a newspaper, but Maya could tell he was listening to her practice. His lips were pursed in disapproval, and he kept shaking his head slightly. At first, she tried to ignore him. She had learned long ago that not everyone would accept her, that some people would always see her as an outsider no matter how hard she worked or how much she achieved. Her mother had taught her to hold her head high and keep moving forward. "The people who matter will see your worth," her mother always said. "The others are just noise." But this man's presence felt heavy, like a storm cloud moving in to block the sun. Maya lowered her voice even more and continued practicing, trying to focus on her notes. She was reviewing the section about her senior thesis project when the man let out a loud, mocking laugh. It wasn't a kind laugh or even an amused one. It was sharp and mean, designed to cut. "Listen to that," the man said loudly, making sure everyone in the cafe could hear him. He was addressing no one in particular, but speaking to the room like he expected an audience. "She's trying to practice for something important, but she can't even speak proper English. That accent is so thick you could cut it with a knife." Maya's hands froze on her index cards. She could feel heat rising to her cheeks. Around them, the cafe seemed to pause. Marcus stopped steaming milk. The mother looked up from her phone. The construction workers turned in their seats. The man continued, his voice getting louder and more theatrical. He began to mimic Maya's accent, exaggerating it to the point of caricature. "My name is Maya Okan, whatever," he said in a horrible imitation that sounded nothing like her actual voice. "I want to build sustainable whatever." He laughed at his own performance. "Sweetheart, let me give you some free advice. If you want a real job in this country, you need to speak proper English. No one's going to hire someone who sounds like they just got off the boat. This is America. We speak American here." The words hit Maya like physical blows. She had heard variations of this sentiment before, in subtle looks and not-so-subtle comments throughout her life. But hearing it so boldly, so publicly, on this day of all days, when she was already fighting her own doubts, felt particularly cruel. For a moment, Maya considered gathering her things and leaving. It would be easier to walk away, to practice somewhere else, to not make a scene. She could feel everyone watching, waiting to see what she would do. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she pressed them flat against the table to steady them. But then she thought about her mother, who had faced far worse discrimination when she first arrived in America but never let it stop her from becoming one of the most respected nurses in her unit. She thought about her brother Samuel, who looked up to her and needed to see that bullies don't always win. She thought about Mrs. Chen, who had built this cafe from nothing despite people telling her she didn't belong. She thought about all the young black girls who might be sitting in cafes somewhere, practicing for their own important moments, needing to know that their voices mattered. Maya set down her cappuccino with deliberate calm. The ceramic made a soft click against the wooden table. She turned in her chair to face the man directly. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear, carrying across the now silent cafe. "Sir, I notice you're concerned about my English," she said, her accent present but her words perfectly articulated. "I appreciate your interest in my language skills. Perhaps you'd like to know that I speak 3 languages fluently. English is actually my 3rd language after Igbo and French." The man's face reddened, but Maya wasn't finished. She stood up, not aggressively, but with the quiet confidence she had learned from watching her mother advocate for patience. "I tutor first-year university students who struggle with English composition. Many of them were born here, spoke English their whole lives, but still need help expressing their thoughts clearly in writing. Language is complex and beautiful in all its forms." She picked up one of her index cards, the yellow one with her personal story. "This accent you're mocking? It represents my heritage, my family's journey, and the richness of experiencing multiple cultures. When I speak, I carry the wisdom of my grandmother in Nigeria, the courage of my parents who started over in a new country, and the dreams of every immigrant who has ever been told they don't belong." The construction workers had put down their coffee cups and were listening intently. The young mother was nodding slowly. Marcus had moved closer, ready to intervene if needed, but Maya's calm control of the situation made it clear she didn't need rescue. She needed witnesses. "You mentioned wanting a real job," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. "I'm interviewing today at Morrison Architecture Group. Perhaps you've heard of them? They renovated this very cafe last year. They turned a failing business into a thriving community space. They value innovation, diversity, and fresh perspectives. Exactly the kind of things that come from people who see the world through multiple lenses. The man opened his mouth to respond, but Maya raised her hand gently, the gesture more powerful than any shout. "I'm not finished, sir. You see, what you call not proper English is actually linguistic diversity. Every accent tells a story. Your accent tells me you're likely from the Northeast, probably spent time in Boston based on how you drop your R's in certain words. That's not improper either. It's just different." She could see she had caught him off guard with her observation. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Maya turned to Marcus. "Marcus, do you still have that microphone from open mic nights?" Marcus's face broke into a grin. "We sure do." He reached behind the counter and pulled out a small wireless microphone, the kind they used for poetry readings every Thursday night. He handed it to Maya with a look of pure admiration. Maya took the microphone and stood in the center of the cafe. Every eye was on her now. She could have been nervous, but instead she felt a strange calm, like everything in her life had led to this moment. "I'd like to demonstrate something," she said into the microphone, her voice clear and carrying. "This is a customer service script I memorized for a part-time job I had last summer." She switched to perfect British English, the kind spoken by BBC newsreaders. "Good afternoon, and welcome to our establishment. How may I assist you in finding the perfect solution for your needs today? We have a varied selection of products designed to meet the highest standards of quality and customer satisfaction." The accent was flawless, crisp, and precise. Then, without missing a beat, she switched to French. "Maintenant, permettez-moi de remercier le personnel de ce café pour leur gentillesse et leur professionnalisme. Vous créez un espace où les gens peuvent poursuivre leurs rêves." She saw a few people in the café nodding, understanding her words of thanks to the staff. Finally, she returned to her natural voice, her Nigerian accent warm and musical. "All three are proper English, proper French, and proper me. Because language isn't about erasing who you are to fit someone else's comfort. It's about communication, connection, and celebrating the beautiful diversity of human expression." She handed the microphone back to Marcus and started to return to her seat. But before she could take a step, someone started clapping. It was one of the construction workers, his calloused hands making sharp, approving sounds. Then the mother joined in, then the students at their laptops. Soon, the entire cafe was applauding. The sound filled the space like thunder, like recognition, like vindication. The man's face had gone from red to white. He fumbled with his newspaper, trying to fold it with shaking hands. As he stood to leave, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. But Maya wasn't done with her moment of triumph. The manager of the cafe, a younger man named Derek who had taken over from Mrs. Chen, emerged from the back office. He had heard everything. "Excuse me, miss," Derek said to Maya, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I couldn't help but overhear. We've actually been looking for someone to help train our staff in customer service excellence. Someone who can connect with our diverse clientele. Would you be interested in a paid trial shift? The position would work around your school schedule, of course." Maya blinked in surprise. Yes, I would be very interested. Thank you." She reached into her portfolio and pulled out one of the extra resumes she always carried, sliding it across the counter to Derek. The timing was almost poetic. As she handed over her resume, the man who had mocked her was pushing through the door to leave, the bell chiming his defeat. Maya returned to her seat and picked up her cappuccino. Marcus had indeed made it special. There was a phoenix drawn in the foam, rising from coffee-colored ashes. She smiled at the symbolism. Around her, the cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but she could feel the energy had shifted. People were smiling more, talking to strangers at nearby tables, and she caught several approving glances sent her way. A young black girl, maybe 16, who had been sitting in the corner with what looked like homework, approached Maya shyly. "That was amazing," she said quietly. "I just moved here from Haiti, and sometimes at school people make fun of how I talk. You made me feel like maybe it's okay to sound like myself." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled out the chair next to her. "Sit with me for a minute," she said. "Let me tell you something my mother told me when I was your age and crying because kids at school said I talked funny." The girl sat down eagerly, My mother said that having an accent means you were brave enough to learn a new language. It means you carry multiple worlds in your voice. Never let anyone make you feel small for being multilingual. Most people who mock accents can barely speak one language properly, let alone 2 or 3. They talked for a few more minutes, Maya sharing tips about code switching when necessary for professional settings while never being ashamed of her natural voice. The girl left with a bigger smile and her shoulders a little straighter. As she watched the teenager go, Maya realized something profound. This moment in the cafe, this confrontation she hadn't asked for, had actually prepared her better for her interview than all her practicing. She had stood up for herself with grace and intelligence. She had turned hostility into opportunity. She had shown leadership and confidence under pressure. These were exactly the qualities Morrison Architecture Group was looking for. She spent the next hour not practicing her memorized speech but reflecting on what had just happened. She rewrote her presentation to include more of her authentic self, her real story, not just the sanitized version she thought they wanted to hear. She would tell them about designing buildings that celebrated cultural diversity, about creating spaces where all voices could be heard, about architecture as a form of social justice. When it was time to leave for her interview, she gathered her things with newfound confidence. Marcus called out to her as she reached the door. "Hey, Maya! Go show them what you showed us. And remember, your voice is your power, not your weakness." She walked out into the morning sun, which had fully broken through the clouds. The city stretched before her, full of buildings and possibilities. As she walked, she thought about the title this morning's experience might have if it were a story. Old White Man Mocked a Black Girl's Accent. Her reply had the whole cafe clapping. It sounded like something people would share on social media, a moment of triumph that reminded others to stand tall. But for Maya, it was more than a viral moment. It was a turning point, a claiming of space, a declaration that she belonged exactly as she was. 3 hours later, Maya sat in the gleaming conference room of Morrison Architecture Group. The panel of 5 executives faced her across a mahogany table that reflected the city's skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her portfolio was open in front of her, her design spread out like dreams made tangible. "Tell us about yourself, Maya," the lead interviewer said, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an encouraging smile. Maya took a breath and began, not with her practice script, but with her truth. "My name is Maya Okonkwo, and I carry 3 languages, 2 cultures, and 1 vision for architecture that brings communities together. Let me tell you about the buildings I want to create, structures that honor both where we come from and where we're going." She spoke for 20 minutes, her accent flowing naturally as she described her design philosophy. She talked about sustainable materials inspired by traditional Nigerian building methods. She discussed cost-effective solutions that didn't sacrifice beauty or functionality. She presented her senior thesis project, a community center designed to serve immigrant families, with spaces that could adapt to different cultural celebrations and needs. The executives asked challenging questions, and she answered each one thoughtfully, her morning's confidence still burning bright. "One last question," the lead interviewer said. "Our firm values diversity and inclusion. Can you give us an example of a time when you've stood up for these values, even when it was difficult?" Maya almost laughed at the perfect timing. She told them about that morning in the cafe, about choosing to educate rather than retaliate, about turning a moment of discrimination into an opportunity for growth and understanding. She spoke about the young girl from Haiti and the importance of representation in all fields, including architecture. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then the lead interviewer smiled. "I think Mrs. Chen would be very proud," she said. Maya's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew Mrs. Chen?" "She was my aunt," the woman replied. "She used to tell me about a young Nigerian girl who studied in her cafe, who was going to change the world one building at a time. I've been hoping you would apply here, and after hearing your presentation and your story, I know she was right about you." 2 weeks later, Maya received the call. She got the job at Morrison Architecture Group, starting as a junior designer with a full benefits package and a mentorship program. Her first assignment would be working on a new community center in a neighborhood with a large immigrant population. It was exactly the kind of project she had dreamed about. She celebrated with her family at their favorite Nigerian restaurant. Her mother cried happy tears into her jollof rice. Her brother Samuel gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. Her father, usually stoic, pulled her into a hug and whispered, "You honored us all today, my daughter. You honored our journey." The next Thursday, Maya returned to the Grindstone Café for open mic night. She had never performed before, but Marcus had convinced her to share her story. The place was packed, the chairs arranged in semicircles facing the small stage area. She recognized several faces from that morning 2 weeks ago, including the construction workers and the young mother. The teenager from Haiti was there too, sitting in the front row with what looked like her whole family. Maya took the microphone, the same one she had used to prove her point to the bitter old man. "I want to tell you a story," she began, her accent clear and proud. "It's about finding your voice in a world that sometimes tries to silence you. It's about how every accent is an accent of courage. And it's called Old White Man Mocked a Black Girl's Accent." Her reply had the whole cafe clapping. She told the story not as a victim, but as a victor. She talked about the importance of standing up with grace, about education over retaliation, about how diversity makes us all stronger. She spoke about architecture and dreams, about building bridges both literal and metaphorical. She thanked Marcus for his support, Derek for the job opportunity, and even the man who had mocked her, because his ignorance had sparked her courage. When she finished, the applause was even louder than that morning. But, more importantly, she saw understanding in people's eyes, connection across differences, and hope for a more inclusive future. After the performance, the teenager from Haiti approached her with her family. Her mother, speaking in accented English, thanked Maya for inspiring her daughter. "She came home that day standing taller," the woman said. "She stopped being ashamed of how we speak. You gave her permission to be proud." As Maya walked home that night, the city lights twinkling around her, she thought about how one moment of standing up for yourself could ripple outward like waves in water. She thought about the buildings she would design, spaces where every voice would be welcomed and celebrated. She thought about her grandmother in Nigeria, who had always told her that words had power, that speaking your truth could change the world. 6 months later, Maya was deep into her work at Morrison Architecture Group. The community center project was progressing beautifully. She had incorporated elements that honored the neighborhood's diverse population, prayer spaces that could serve multiple faiths, kitchens equipped for different cultural cooking styles, and flexible gathering areas that could host everything from quinceañeras to Eid celebrations. Her design had impressed the senior architects so much that they invited her to present it at a national conference on inclusive architecture. Standing on that stage, speaking to hundreds of professionals in her field, Maya's accent rang clear and confident. She was no longer the nervous girl practicing in a cafe. She was an architect, a designer, a bridge builder. During the Q&A session, someone asked about overcoming discrimination in professional settings. Maya smiled, thinking back to that morning in the Grindstone Café. "Let me tell you a story," she said, "about how an old white man mocked a black girl's accent," and her reply had the whole café clapping. "But, more importantly, let me tell you what happened after the applause stopped." She explained how that moment had taught her that standing up for yourself wasn't just about the immediate confrontation. It was about using that strength to open doors for others, to change systems, to build, literally and figuratively, these spaces where everyone belonged. The community center opened a year later. Maya stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by families from dozens of different countries. Children ran through the spaces she had designed, their laughter echoing in multiple languages. Parents examined the cultural artifacts displayed in cases she had specifically included to celebrate the neighborhood's diversity. The mayor gave a speech about innovation and inclusion. Local news covered the story. But for Maya, the most meaningful moment came when she saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was the teenager from Haiti, now in her senior year of high school. She was volunteering at the center, teaching younger kids French and Haitian Creole in one of the language exchange programs Maya had helped establish. "I'm applying to architecture school," the girl told Maya proudly. "I want to design buildings too, buildings that tell our stories." Maya hugged her tightly, remembering her own dreams at that age. The cycle was continuing, each generation lifting the next. As the celebration continued around them, Maya thought about how far she had come from that morning in the cafe. She had turned a moment of discrimination into a movement of empowerment. She had proven that accents were not barriers but bridges. That diversity was not a weakness but a strength. That evening, Maya returned to the Grindstone Café. It had become her tradition to visit whenever she completed a major project. Derek had promoted her from trial shifts to training coordinator, a position she held alongside her architecture career. She enjoyed teaching the staff about customer service, but more importantly, about creating an inclusive environment where everyone felt welcomed. Marcus was still there, now the head barista and part owner after Derek had offered him partnership. He made her a cappuccino with her old Phoenix design in the foam. "Remember that morning?" he asked with a grin. "Changed everything, didn't it?" Maya nodded, sipping her coffee and looking around the familiar space. New faces mixed with regulars, all coexisting in the comfortable chaos of the evening rush. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said. "I never saw that man again. I don't even know his name, but in a strange way I'm grateful to him. His prejudice forced me to find my power." Marcus leaned against the counter thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the best revenge. Not destroying your enemies, but using their negativity to fuel your success. He's probably somewhere still bitter and small, while you're out here literally building the future." As Maya prepared to leave, a young Asian man approached her nervously. He had been sitting nearby, working on what looked like job applications. "Excuse me," he said in accented English that suggested Korean origins. "I overheard your conversation. Did something happen here about accents? I just started job hunting and I'm worried about my English in interviews." Maya smiled, recognizing her younger self in his anxiety. She pulled out a chair. "Sit down. Let me tell you a story about the power of your unique voice. And then, if you want, I'll help you practice. But not to hide your accent, to make it part of your strength." They talked for an hour, Maya sharing interview tips while emphasizing authenticity. She helped him reframe his multilingual abilities as assets, not deficits. By the end, he was sitting straighter, speaking with more confidence. "Thank you," he said as he gathered his applications. "I needed to hear this today." After he left, Maya sat alone for a moment, reflecting on the ripples that continued to spread from that single morning. One act of standing up had become countless acts of lifting others. One moment of claiming her voice had helped others find theirs. 5 years passed. Maya became a senior architect at Morrison Group, leading the diversity and inclusion initiative alongside her design work. She had built community centers, schools, and affordable housing projects that had won national awards. Her designs were studied in architecture schools as examples of culturally responsive building. But her proudest achievement was the scholarship fund she had established for immigrant students pursuing architecture degrees. She named it after Mrs. Chen, the cafe owner who had shown her kindness when she was a frightened freshman. The scholarship had already supported 12 students, each with their own accent, their own story, their own dreams of building better worlds. The Grindstone Café had become something of a landmark in the community. Students knew it as the place where Maya Okonkwo had stood up to discrimination and won. The story had been written about in the university newspaper, shared on social media, and become part of local legend. Derek had even put up a small plaque by Maya's old corner table that read, "At this table, Maya Okonkwo proved that every voice matters. Speak your truth." On the 5th anniversary of that morning, Maya organized a celebration at the cafe. She invited everyone who had been there that day who she could find, along with the many people she had mentored over the years. The place was packed with architects, students, immigrants, and locals who had heard the story. Maya stood with the microphone once again, looking out at the diverse crowd. 5 years ago, in this very spot, an old white man mocked a black girl's accent. Her reply had the whole cafe clapping. But the real story isn't about the applause. It's about what we do after the clapping stops. It's about how we use our voices not just to defend ourselves, but to make space for others. It's about building, with our words, our actions, and in my case, literally with bricks and mortar, a world where every accent is celebrated, where every voice is heard, where every person knows they belong. The crowd erupted in applause, but this time it was different. It wasn't just support for someone who had been wronged. It was a celebration of collective progress, of boundaries broken and bridges built. As the evening continued, Maya moved through the crowd, listening to stories of other people who had found courage in her example. A Pakistani doctor who had stopped apologizing for her accent in medical presentations. A Mexican engineer who had started a support group for immigrant professionals. A Chinese teacher who had incorporated accent appreciation into her classroom curriculum. Later that night, as the cafe was closing, Derek pulled Maya aside. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Remember the man who mocked you that morning? His name was Harrison Wells. He was a retired executive who used to come here regularly before that day." Maya raised her eyebrows. She had never known his name. What happened to him? Derek smiled. His granddaughter found out what he did. She was mortified. "She's actually a diversity consultant, can you believe it? She made him take sensitivity training. And get this, she uses your story in her presentations as an example of grace under pressure and the importance of standing up to prejudice." Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. "Did he ever apologize?" "He wrote a letter," Derek said, pulling out an envelope from behind the counter. "Came by about a year ago, left this for you. I was waiting for the right time to give it to you." Maya took the envelope, her name written on it in shaky handwriting. She opened it carefully. The letter was short but sincere. "Ms. Okonkwo, I am the fool who mocked your accent 5 years ago. I have no excuse for my behavior, only regret. My granddaughter helped me understand that I was threatened by change, by difference, by my own irrelevance in a world that had moved past my narrow views. You handled my cruelty with more grace than I deserved. I've learned that accents are music, that diversity is strength, that young women like you are building the future while old men like me cling to a past that never should have existed. I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to know that your words changed someone that day, even if that someone was the last person who deserved your wisdom. I hope your voice continues to ring clear and proud. Respectfully, Harrison Wells." Maya folded the letter carefully. She thought about cycles of hurt and healing, about how change happened one person at a time, one moment at a time, one brave stand at a time. "What are you thinking?" Derek asked. Maya smiled. "I'm thinking about my next building project. A cultural center specifically designed for intergenerational dialogue. A place where people like Mr. Wells and people like me can meet and learn from each other. Where accents mix and stories merge. Where understanding replaces mockery." She looked around the Grindstone Café one more time, remembering the girl she had been, celebrating the woman she had become. "And I think I'll call it The Bridge." 10 years after that pivotal morning, the Bridge Cultural Center stood as a testament to the power of turning conflict into connection. It had become a model replicated in cities across the country. Maya, now a partner at Morrison Architecture Group and a nationally recognized advocate for inclusive design, often gave tours to architecture students. She would always stop at the central atrium, where voices in dozens of languages echoed off the carefully designed acoustic walls, creating a symphony of human diversity. On this particular day, she was giving a tour to a group of international students. As they stood in the main gathering space, one student, a young woman from Bangladesh, raised her hand. "Ms. Okonkwo, we heard about what happened to you in the cafe. How did you stay so calm? How did you turn that moment into all of this?" Maya thought for a moment, then smiled. "Let me tell you the full story. Not just the viral version everyone knows, but the real story. It starts with fear, includes doubt, and requires more courage than I thought I had. But most importantly, it's not just my story. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told their voice doesn't matter. She led them to a quiet corner of the center where a photo exhibition lined the walls. The pictures showed immigrants throughout American history: Irish, Italian, Chinese, Mexican, African, and dozens more. Under each photo were quotes in their original accents, transcribed phonetically, celebrating their contributions to the country. That morning in the cafe, Maya continued, I realized I was part of a long tradition. Every wave of immigrants has faced someone telling them they don't speak properly. And every generation has proven that diversity of voice leads to richness of thought, innovation of ideas, and strength of community. She pointed to a photo of Mrs. Chen, the original cafe owner, which held a place of honor in the exhibition. She came from Taiwan in the 1960s. People mocked her accent too. But she built a business, created a community, and made space for a scared Nigerian girl to find her voice. That's the real power. Not just standing up for yourself, but creating spaces where others can stand too. As the tour continued, Maya noticed a familiar face in the center's library. It was the girl from Haiti, now a successful architect herself, mentoring a group of high school students. They made eye contact and shared a smile of recognition, two links in an ever-growing chain of empowerment. That evening, Maya returned once more to the Grindstone Café. It had been renovated again, this time with input from Maya's firm, maintaining its cozy atmosphere while improving accessibility and adding spaces for community gatherings. The corner table where she used to study now bore a small bronze plaque that had become something of a pilgrimage site for young immigrants facing their own challenges. She sat at that table with her laptop, working on her book. The publisher had approached her after her TED Talk about inclusive architecture had gone viral. The book was part memoir, part manifesto for a more inclusive world. She had struggled with the title until Marcus, now married with kids and running 3 cafes, had suggested the obvious. Old white man mocked a black girl's accent. Her reply had the whole cafe clapping, a story of finding your voice and building bridges. As she typed, she thought about all the young people who would read her story, who would find courage in their own moments of challenge. She thought about Harrison Wells, who had passed away 2 years ago, but not before becoming an unlikely advocate for diversity in his retirement community. His granddaughter had told Maya that he spent his final years teaching other elderly people about unconscious bias, using his own mistake as a cautionary tale. The cafe buzzed around her with its usual evening energy. She heard at least 6 different languages being spoken, saw students of every color and background pursuing their dreams over coffee and laptop screens. Marcus brought her a cappuccino, still drawing phoenixes in the foam after all these years. You know, he said, I've been thinking about that morning a lot lately. My daughter just started school, and she came home upset because someone said she talked funny. She has a bit of a lisp we're working on with speech therapy. Maya looked up from her laptop. What did you tell her? I told her about you, about how differences in how we speak make the world more interesting, about how the people who matter will listen to what you say, not how you say it, and about how a young woman once proved in this very cafe that every voice has power. His daughter was lucky, Maya thought, to have a father who understood that lesson. She made a mental note to invite the little girl to the bridge, to show her the children's section where kids could record their stories in their own voices, creating an audio library of childhood experiences from around the world. As the evening wore on, Maya finished another chapter of her book. This one was about the responsibility that came with success, how breaking barriers meant holding doors open for others, how individual triumph meant nothing without collective progress. A notification popped up on her phone. It was an email from the White House. She had been selected for the National Architecture Award, recognizing her contributions to inclusive design and community building. The ceremony would be next month, and they wanted her to give a speech. She smiled, already knowing how she would begin. My name is Maya Okonkwo, and I speak with an accent. That accent carries the story of my grandmother's wisdom, my parents' courage, and my community's strength. Today, I want to tell you about how an old white man mocked a black girl's accent, and how her reply had the whole cafe clapping. But more importantly, I want to tell you about what we built after the applause stopped." As she packed up her things to leave, a young man approached her hesitantly. He looked Middle Eastern, probably Syrian from the Damascus dialect she caught in his tentative, "Excuse me." He was holding a well-worn notebook and his hands were shaking slightly. "You are Maya Okonkwo, yes?" he asked, his accent thick with recent arrival. "I am Samir. I came from Syria 6 months ago. I am engineer there, but here—" He paused, his eyes dropping to the floor. "Here, they say my English not good enough. They say, come back when you speak better. I want to give up." Maya immediately gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit down, Samir. Please." As he sat, she could see the familiar weight of displacement in his shoulders, the same burden she had carried as a young girl. "Tell me about the engineering you did in Syria," she said in careful, clear English, making sure not to simplify her language but to speak with intention. His eyes lit up as he began describing his work on water purification systems in refugee camps, his hands moving expressively as he explained complex filtration processes. His English was heavily accented but perfectly understandable, his technical knowledge evident in every word. "Samir," Maya said when he finished, "your English is more than good enough. What's not good enough is a system that values perfect pronunciation over brilliant minds. Let me ask you something. How many languages do those employers speak?" He looked confused. "Maybe 1, maybe 2? And you?" "Arabic, Kurdish, some Turkish, French from school, and now English." Maya smiled. 5 languages, and they dare to tell you your English isn't good enough? She pulled out her business card and wrote something on the back. "Tomorrow there's a networking event at the Bridge Cultural Center. Engineers, architects, designers, many of them immigrants like us. I want you to come. Don't hide your accent. Lead with it. Tell them exactly what you told me about your water purification work. I know at least 3 firms looking for that expertise." Samir's eyes filled with tears. "Why you help me? You don't know me. Because 10 years ago, someone showed me kindness when I needed it most. Because 5 years before that, my mother was you. Qualified, brilliant, and dismissed because of how she sounded. Because this is how we change things, Samir. One connection at a time, one voice at a time." She stood to leave, then turned back. "And Samir, next time someone tells you to come back when your English is better, tell them you'll come back when they can explain water purification systems in 5 languages. Then hand them your card and walk away with your head high." As Maya walked home through the city streets, she reflected on how that morning in the cafe had become a defining moment, not just for her, but for so many others. The story had taken on a life of its own, shared in diversity trainings, referenced in academic papers, and retold in different languages around the world. But for Maya, it remained deeply personal, a reminder that courage could be quiet, that strength could be graceful, and that standing up for yourself could become standing up for everyone. Her phone rang. It was her mother, calling for their weekly check-in. "Mama, you won't believe who I just met," Maya said, switching to Igbo, the language of their private conversations. She told her mother about Samir, about the White House Award, about the continuing ripples from that morning a decade ago. "I am proud of you, my daughter," her mother said, but not surprised. "You remember what your grandmother used to say. When you speak your truth, the ancestors speak through you." That morning in the cafe, it wasn't just you standing up. It was all of us. Every parent who left home for their children's future, every grandparent who preserved our languages despite pressure to forget, every child who carries multiple worlds in their voice. The next evening, at the networking event, Maya watched with satisfaction as Samir commanded a small crowd of engineers with his presentation on sustainable water systems. His accent was unchanged, but his confidence had transformed. By the end of the night, he had 3 job interviews scheduled and a consulting offer for a project on water access in underserved communities. "You see," Maya told him as the event wound down, "they weren't listening to your accent. They were listening to your expertise." A woman approached them, elegant in a navy suit, with silver hair and an air of authority. "Miss Okonkwo, I'm Patricia Wells Morgan, Harrison Wells was my grandfather. Maya tensed slightly, but the woman's expression was warm. I wanted to thank you. What happened that morning changed our entire family. It forced us to confront years of unexamined prejudice. My grandfather spent his last years trying to make amends, not just for that day but for a lifetime of small cruelties he had never questioned. She pulled out a check. He left instructions in his will. He wanted to contribute to any educational initiative you were involved with. He said it was the least he could do to support the voices he had tried to silence. Maya looked at the check. It was substantial, enough to fund several scholarships. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it to help more young people find their voices, Patricia said. And know that your grace that morning taught an old man and his family that it's never too late to change. After Patricia left, Samir looked at Maya with amazement. The man who mocked you, his family now supports your work. Maya nodded slowly. That's the power of responding to hate with education, Samir. You don't just change the moment, you change the future. Harrison Wells went from mocking my accent to funding scholarships for immigrant students. His granddaughter went from witnessing his prejudice to becoming a diversity advocate. The ripples continue long after the stone hits the water. As the years passed, the Bridge Cultural Center became a national model. Architecture students studied Maya's designs. Business schools taught cases about turning discrimination into opportunity. The story of the Café incident was included in textbooks about conflict resolution and social change. But in the Grindstone Café, life continued with its usual rhythm. Students still hunched over laptops. Parents still juggled coffee and children. Dreams were still pursued over cappuccinos and conversations. The only difference was the variety of accents that filled the space, each one celebrated rather than silenced. Maya's book became a bestseller, translated into 15 languages. She received letters from around the world. From a Japanese student in London who found courage to speak up in class. From a Mexican entrepreneur in Texas who stopped hiding his accent in business meetings. From an Indian doctor in Canada who started a support group for immigrant medical professionals. Each letter reinforced the same truth. Individual acts of courage created collective change. On the 15th anniversary of that morning, the Café held a celebration. The space was transformed with decorations representing cultures from around the world. The walls displayed photographs and stories from people who had been inspired by Maya's stand. A documentary crew was there, finishing a film about the long-term impact of viral moments of social justice. Maya stood once again with the microphone, but this time she was surrounded by dozens of people whose lives had been touched by her story. There was Samir, now a successful engineer running his own firm specializing in sustainable water solutions for developing nations. There was the girl from Haiti, now Dr. Marie Dubois, a professor of architecture at the university. There was Marcus, whose café chain had become known for its inclusive hiring practices and multilingual customer service training. 15 years ago, Maya began, her voice steady and warm, an old white man mocked a black girl's accent. Her reply had the whole café clapping. But the real story isn't about one morning or one confrontation. It's about all of us. Every person who has ever been told they don't belong. Every voice that has been dismissed or diminished. Every accent that carries the beautiful complexity of a life lived between worlds. She looked around the room, seeing faces from dozens of countries, hearing whispers of translation as people shared her words in their own languages. That morning, I thought I was just standing up for myself. But I've learned that when we stand up for ourselves, we stand up for everyone who came before us and everyone who will come after. We create space for voices that haven't even found their courage yet. She paused, thinking of her grandmother, who had passed away 5 years ago, but not before seeing her granddaughter receive international recognition for her work. In their last conversation, speaking in Igbo, her grandmother had said, "You have honored our voices, child. You have made our accents into architecture, building bridges with the very thing others said would hold you back." Today, Maya continued, I want to challenge everyone here. Find someone who speaks differently than you do. Listen to their accent not as a barrier but as a bridge to understanding their journey. Every inflection tells a story. Every pronunciation carries history. Every voice deserves to be heard. The crowd erupted in multilingual appreciation. Applause mixed with words of affirmation in dozens of languages. Maya noticed a young girl in the corner, maybe 8 years old, wearing a hijab and clutching her mother's hand. She had that same look Maya recognized from her own childhood, the uncertainty of being between worlds, the weight of carrying multiple identities. Maya walked over to her after the speech. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Amira," the girl whispered, her accent suggesting Arabic origins. "I just started at new school. Kids say I talk weird." Maya knelt down to Amira's eye level. "Do you know what I hear when you speak? I hear courage. It takes courage to learn a new language. It takes courage to keep your first language. You're not talking weird, Amira. You're talking in multiple colors while they're stuck in black and white." She pulled out a card from her pocket, an invitation to the Bridges Youth Program. "Would you like to come to our storytelling circle? Kids your age share stories in all their languages. You can teach others Arabic words, and they'll teach you their languages. We celebrate every accent there." Amira's mother's eyes filled with tears. "We came from Lebanon 2 years ago. It's been so hard for her." "It gets easier," Maya assured her. "Not because the world suddenly becomes kind, but because we find our power. We find our people. We find our voice." As the celebration continued, Maya stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The city hummed around her, a symphony of cultures and languages that she had helped make more harmonious. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Samuel, now a successful lawyer specializing in immigrant rights. "Saw the live stream of your speech. Grandma would be so proud. We all are." She smiled, thinking about the journey from that nervous girl practicing for an interview to the woman who had just addressed a room full of changemakers. The architecture of her life had been built on the foundation of that single morning when she chose to stand rather than shrink. Walking back inside, she overheard 2 college students talking. One was practicing for a presentation, stumbling over words, her Korean accent thick with nerves. The other, a local student, was gently encouraging her. "Remember what Maya Okonkwo says," the local student said. "Your accent is your superpower. It means you've conquered languages others can't even imagine learning." Maya smiled. The message had spread beyond her reach, taking on its own life in conversations she would never hear, in moments she would never witness. That was the true architecture of change, not just the buildings made of concrete and steel, but the structures of support, understanding, and celebration built in human hearts. As the evening ended and the cafe began to empty, Derek approached Maya with an envelope. "This came for you yesterday. I wanted to give it to you personally." The return address was from a small town in Mississippi. Inside was a handwritten letter from a teacher. "Dear Ms. Okonkwo, I teach 5th grade in a small town where most people have never left the state. This year, I have 3 students who recently arrived from Venezuela. They were being bullied for their accents. I found your story online and read it to my class. Then I played your TED Talk. The change was immediate. Not only did the bullying stop, but the other kids started asking to learn Spanish words. One boy said, 'If having an accent means you're brave enough to learn new languages, then they're the smartest kids in class.' I wanted you to know that your story is changing hearts in places you might never visit. Thank you for having the courage to stand up that day. The ripples have reached all the way to rural Mississippi. With gratitude, Mrs. Jennifer Patterson." Maya carefully folded the letter and placed it in her bag with all the others she had collected over the years. Each one was a reminder that individual actions could have infinite impact, that standing up in one cafe could echo in classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms around the world. The next morning, Maya sat in her office at Morrison Architecture Group, now the firm's first black female senior partner. Her latest project was spread across her desk, plans for a new international elementary school designed to celebrate multilingual education. Every classroom would have acoustic designs that made it easier for children with different accents to be heard clearly. The library would have books in 50 languages. The auditorium would host cultural celebrations from around the world. Her assistant knocked and entered. "Ms. Okonkwo, there's someone here to see you. Says he's from the cafe? Confused, Maya asked for him to be sent in. A middle-aged man entered wearing a coffee-stained grindstone cafe apron. She didn't recognize him. "Miss Okonkwo, I'm Tom. I started working at the cafe about 6 months ago. I wanted to thank you." He sat down nervously. "I'm 45 years old, just got out of prison after 10 years. When I got out, nobody would hire me. My parole officer suggested the cafe because Derek has a program for formerly incarcerated people. On my first day, Derek told me your story. He said that Café was a place where everyone gets a second chance, where everyone's voice matters. He said you taught him that." Tom's voice cracked slightly. "I've made a lot of mistakes. I had a lot of hate in my heart, including the kind that man showed you that day. But working at the café, seeing people from everywhere coming together, hearing all those languages and accents, it changed me. I wanted you to know that your standing up that day is still helping people find better versions of themselves, even people like me who didn't deserve that grace." Maya was quiet for a moment, moved by this unexpected connection. "Tom, we all deserve grace. We all deserve the chance to grow beyond our worst moments. Harrison Wells learned that. You're learning it. That's the whole point. Not to divide the world into good and bad people, but to create spaces where people can become better." After Tom left, Maya stood at her window, looking out at the city skyline. So many of those buildings now incorporated inclusive design elements she had pioneered. But more importantly, within those buildings, conversations were happening in hundreds of accents, each one valued, each one heard. That afternoon, she received a call from the United Nations. They wanted her to speak at the International Day of Peace about using architecture and urban planning to build inclusive communities. They specifically wanted her to share the café story and its aftermath. "The world needs to hear how individual courage becomes collective change," the organizer said. "Your story shows that standing up to discrimination isn't just about that moment. It's about what we build afterward." As Maya agreed to the speaking engagement, she thought about how far that moment in the café had traveled. From a nervous college senior practicing for an interview to an international advocate for inclusive design. From a single confrontation to a global conversation about the value of diverse voices. That evening, Maya returned to the Grindstone Café for her weekly mentoring session. She had established a program where successful immigrants met with newcomers, sharing not just professional advice but also the emotional support needed to navigate life between cultures. Tonight, she was meeting with 5 young women, each from a different country, each facing their own version of the challenges she had once faced. As they settled around the table, the same corner table where she had once practiced her interview, one of them, a young woman from Bangladesh, said, "I read your book 3 times, but I still don't understand how you stayed so calm. When people mock my accent, I get so angry I can't speak." Maya smiled, remembering her own suppressed anger that morning. "I was angry too. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. But I realized something in that moment. Anger without action just burns you up inside. Anger channeled into education, into building something better that changes the world." She looked around the table at their eager faces. Each of you will have your café moment, a time when someone tries to make you feel small because of how you speak or where you're from. When that moment comes, remember, you're not just standing up for yourself. You're standing up for your grandmothers who might not have had the chance to speak. You're standing up for your future daughters who deserve to be heard. You're standing up for every person who's ever been silenced. The mentoring session continued for 2 hours, with the young women sharing their own experiences, their fears, and their dreams. Maya listened to each story, hearing echoes of her own journey in their words. She gave practical advice about code switching in professional settings while maintaining authentic identity. She shared strategies for turning discrimination into opportunity. But mostly, she reminded them that their voices, accents and all, were their strength. As the session ended and the women prepared to leave, the youngest, barely 18 and fresh from Vietnam, asked shyly, "Miss Okonkwo, do you think things will ever really change? Will there ever be a time when accents don't matter?" Maya considered the question carefully. "I don't think accents will ever not matter. But I believe we're building a world where they matter in the right way. where they're celebrated instead of mocked, where they're seen as bridges instead of barriers. Every time one of us speaks up, we make it easier for the next person. That's how change happens. One voice at a time, one moment at a time, one brave stand at a time. The girl nodded, standing a little taller as she left the cafe. Maya remained seated, looking around the space that had become sacred to her. The walls held so many memories now, not just of that pivotal morning, but of all the moments since. All the people who had found their courage here. All the connections made across difference. All the bridges built with words and understanding. Her phone buzzed with a message from the documentary filmmaker. The film about the cafe incident and its impact was almost complete. They wanted to do one final interview, asking her what she would say to that scared college senior practicing for her interview if she could go back in time. Maya thought about it as she walked home through the city streets. What would she tell that younger version of herself? That the interview would go well? That she would get the job? That she would become successful beyond her dreams? No, she decided. She would tell her younger self exactly what happened. That an old man would mock her accent. That it would hurt and make her angry. But that she would find the courage to stand up with grace. And that single act of courage would ripple outward in ways she could never imagine. She would tell her that her voice, accent, and all would help design buildings where every voice could be heard. That her stand would inspire others to stand. That her bridge building would literal and metaphorical, creating connections across every kind of divide. The next day, sitting in front of the documentary cameras for the final interview, Maya spoke directly to the lens, imagining she was talking to every person who had ever been made to feel small because of how they spoke. 15 years ago, an old white man mocked a black girl's accent. Her reply had the whole cafe clapping. But that's not where the story ends. It's where it begins. Every day since then, someone, somewhere, has chosen to stand up instead of shrink back. They've chosen to educate instead of retaliate. They've chosen to build bridges instead of walls. Your accent is not your weakness. It's your history, your journey, your proof that you've conquered challenges others can't imagine. When you speak, you carry the voices of everyone who came before you and create space for everyone who comes after. So speak clearly. Speak proudly. Speak your truth, because someone, somewhere, needs to hear exactly what you have to say, exactly how you say it. As the cameras stopped rolling and the crew began packing up, Maya received a text from the teenager from Haiti, Dr. Marie Dubois now. She had just been awarded a Fulbright scholarship to study inclusive architecture in Nigeria, coming full circle to learn from the building traditions that had partly inspired Maya's work. Following in your footsteps, the text read, but making my own path. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Maya smiled, thinking about the beautiful complexity of influence and inspiration. How one moment of courage could become 1,000 moments. How one voice standing up could become a chorus. How one bridge could become a network connecting communities across every divide. That night at the Bridge Cultural Center's annual gala, Maya stood before 500 guests from every corner of the world. The theme of the evening was Voices Without Borders, and the program featured performances in 20 different languages, each celebrating the beauty of linguistic diversity. As she prepared to give her keynote address, Maya noticed a familiar figure in the audience. It was Patricia Wells Morgan, Harrison's granddaughter, now a major donor to the bridge. Next to her sat a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Harrison. Patricia caught Maya's eye and mouthed, "My son, he wanted to meet you." After her speech, the young man approached. "Ms. Okonkwo, I'm Harrison Wells III. I wanted to thank you for the grace you showed my grandfather. He spent his last years telling everyone about how wrong he had been, how much he had learned. He made sure all his grandchildren understood that every accent tells a story worth hearing. Because of you, our family legacy isn't his moment of cruelty. It's his journey toward understanding." Maya shook his hand warmly. "We all have the capacity to grow. Your grandfather proved that. His story reminds us that it's never too late to change, never too late to become better. That's a powerful legacy, too." As the gala continued, Maya moved through the crowd, hearing snatches of conversation in dozens of languages. She watched children perform traditional dances from their parents' homelands. She saw elderly immigrants sharing stories with young professionals. She witnessed the kind of multicultural harmony that seemed impossible to those who feared difference. Near the end of the evening, Maya was called back to the stage for a surprise. Derek and Marcus were there, along with dozens of people from the cafe over the years. They had created a scholarship fund in her name, the Maya Okonkwo Voice and Courage Fund, specifically for immigrant students pursuing careers in architecture, engineering, and urban planning. The fund already had over $1 million in commitments. "This is for every student who's ever been told their accent is a problem," Derek announced. "This is for every brilliant mind that might be dismissed because of how they speak. This is to ensure that Maya's courage that morning continues to open doors for generations to come." As Maya stood there, overwhelmed by the gesture, she thought about the mysterious mathematics of impact. How could one morning in a cafe lead to all this? How could a moment of standing up become a movement of lifting up? How could defending her own voice amplify so many others? But perhaps that was the wrong question. Perhaps the question was, how could it not? When we stand up for ourselves authentically, gracefully, powerfully, we give others permission to do the same. When we turn discrimination into education, we transform poison into medicine. When we build bridges instead of walls, we create pathways for countless others to cross. The evening ended with everyone in the room saying "thank you" in their native languages. The sound was like music, a symphony of gratitude in Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, Hindi, Polish, Tagalog, and dozens of other languages. It was the sound of voices refusing to be silenced, of accents refusing to be erased, of stories demanding to be heard. Years later, when Maya was asked to write the introduction for a textbook on inclusive architecture, she began with these words: "Architecture is not just about buildings. It's about creating spaces where every voice can resonate. It's about designing structures that celebrate rather than suppress diversity. It's about building bridges, literal and metaphorical, that connect rather than divide. This work begins not with blueprints or budgets, but with the courage to stand up and speak out. It begins with the understanding that every accent is an asset, every language a gift, every voice a necessary part of the chorus. It begins the moment we stop apologizing for how we speak and start celebrating the richness of our linguistic diversity." I learned this lesson 15 years ago in a cafe, when an old white man mocked a black girl's accent. Her reply had the whole cafe clapping. But more importantly, her reply started a conversation that continues to this day. A conversation about belonging, about value, about the power of voices that refuse to be silenced. The textbook would go on to be used in architecture programs around the world. Students would study Maya's buildings, but more importantly, they would study her philosophy, that good design creates space for everyone, that the best structures honor the diversity of those who use them, that architecture could be a tool for social justice. And in the Grindstone Café, life continued. New students discovered its welcoming atmosphere. New immigrants found community over coffee. New dreams were born and nurtured in conversations held in accents from every corner of the globe. The corner table where Maya had sat still bore its small plaque, now worn smooth by countless fingers tracing its words. At this table, Maya Okonkwo proved that every voice matters. Speak your truth. And people did. Every day, in every accent, people spoke their truth. They stood up for themselves and others. They built bridges with their words and their work. They proved, again and again, that diversity was not a challenge to overcome, but a strength to celebrate. The ripples from that morning in the cafe continued to spread, reaching places Maya would never see, touching lives she would never know. A teacher in Japan used her story to encourage students to maintain their regional dialects. A CEO in Germany instituted accent-blind hiring practices after reading her book. A grandmother in Mexico shared her tale with a granddaughter afraid to speak English at school. Each retelling added new layers to the story, new meanings, new inspirations. But at its core, the message remained the same. Your voice matters. Your accent is your history. Your story deserves to be heard. Stand up, speak out, and build bridges for others to cross. And so the story that began with mockery became a legacy of empowerment. The moment that could have silenced a young woman's voice instead amplified voices around the world. The confrontation that could have divided instead united people across every kind of difference. Because Maya had understood something fundamental that morning in the cafe. When we respond to hatred with grace, to ignorance with education, to cruelty with courage, we don't just win the moment, we transform the future. We don't just defend ourselves, we create space for everyone who comes after us. We don't just claim our own voice, we become part of a chorus that can change the world. Old White Man mocked a black girl's accent. Her reply had the whole cafe clapping. It had become more than a title, more than a story. It had become a reminder that every voice has power, every accent has value, and every person has the capacity to turn a moment of discrimination into a movement of transformation. And in cafes and classrooms and boardrooms and community centers, in places Maya would never see and languages she would never speak, the clapping continued, not just for her, but for everyone who found the courage to stand up and speak their truth, accent and all.